This is the story of a man who killed every single member of his family, his wife, his mother, and his 3 children, then calmly turned on the lights, switched the music on, and walked out the front door. He wouldn't be caught for 18 years, and when they finally found him, he was living the exact same life. Same kind of job, same kind of wife, same pew at church on Sunday, as if nothing had happened. His name was John List. On the surface, John List was the kind of man no one would ever suspect of anything. He was an accountant, a military veteran, a devout Lutheran who taught Sunday school every week without fail. He lived with his family in a massive 19-room Victorian mansion in Westfield, New Jersey, a home called Breeze Knoll that sat on a hill overlooking the town. But behind the stained glass windows and manicured lawn, John List was drowning. He'd lost his job as a bank vice president months earlier and never told anyone. Not his wife, not his mother, not his children. Every morning he put on his suit, picked up his briefcase, and drove to the train station. He'd sit there. He'd read the newspaper. Then he'd come home at the end of the day as if everything was normal. The mortgage was overdue. The taxes were piling up. He'd already burned through his mother's savings, $400,000, and there was nothing left. John List was a man who measured his worth by how the world saw him, and the world he'd constructed was about to collapse. But the financial ruin was only part of it. His wife Helen had started drinking. His daughter Patricia was getting interested in theater and, in his mind, drifting from the church. His oldest son, John Jr., was showing signs of what List later described as rebellion. To a man as rigid and obsessively religious as John List, his family wasn't just falling apart financially. They were falling apart spiritually. And in his warped logic, that was worse. He convinced himself that if his family continued on this path, poverty, faithlessness, moral decay, they would lose their souls. But if they died now while they were still believers, they would go to heaven. He wasn't killing them. He was saving them. That was the lie he told himself. November 9th, 1971. The morning started like any other. John List made breakfast with his wife Helen. The kids left for school. His mother, Alma, was upstairs in her third-floor apartment. She was 85 years old, frail, and rarely came down. After the children left, List walked into the kitchen where Helen was having her morning coffee. He raised a 9mm semi-automatic handgun and shot her in the head. She fell to the floor. He dragged her body into the ballroom. Yes, the house had a ballroom, and placed her on a sleeping bag. Then he walked upstairs. His mother Alma was in her apartment, likely unaware of what had just happened one floor below. He shot her too, once, above the left eye. He left her body in the third-floor hallway. Then he waited. He had hours before the children came home. During those hours, John List sat in that house with 2 dead bodies and went about his day. He wrote letters. He wrote one to his pastor, explaining what he had done and why. He didn't express regret. He expressed theology. He told the pastor he'd thought about this for many weeks and that it was the only way to save his family's souls. His 16-year-old daughter, Patricia, was the first child home. He shot her in the back of the head. He placed her body beside her mother in the ballroom. His 13-year-old son, Frederick, came home next. Same thing. Shot. Placed in the ballroom. Then he drove to Westfield High School to watch his oldest son, John Jr., play in a soccer game. He sat in the stands like any other parent. When the game ended, he drove his son home, and in the kitchen of that enormous house where the bodies of 4 family members were already growing cold, he shot John Jr. too. But John Jr. didn't die right away. There was a struggle. Multiple shots were fired. John Jr. tried to fight back. He was 15 years old. His father shot him 10 times before he finally stopped moving. List dragged his son's body into the ballroom and placed him next to his mother, his sister, and his brother. He laid all 4 bodies out in a row on sleeping bags, as if they were sleeping. He covered them. He knelt down and prayed over them. Then he got to work. He didn't panic. He didn't run. John List spent the rest of the evening methodically erasing his trail. He cut his face out of every family photo in the house, every single one. He turned on all the lights. He tuned the intercom system to a radio station playing classical music and turned the volume up so the house would seem occupied from the outside. He stopped the mail. He called the children's schools and told them the family would be visiting relatives in North Carolina for an extended trip. He wrote a note to his pastor with detailed instructions about the house. Then he packed a bag, got into his car, and drove to John F. Kennedy Airport. John List vanished. The bodies weren't discovered for nearly a month. It was a neighbor who finally noticed. The lights had been on every single night for weeks. The house was getting cold. It was winter and the heat had been turned off. On December 7th, neighbors and the police entered Breeze Knoll. They found the 4 bodies in the ballroom, arranged neatly in a row. They found Alma upstairs. The radio was still playing. The investigation kicked into high gear, but it was already too late. List had a month head start. He'd driven to Denver, assumed a new identity, Robert Peter Clark, and started over completely. He got a job as an accountant. He joined a new church. He eventually remarried. For 18 years, John List lived as Robert Clark. He paid his taxes. He went to work. He went to church. He never spoke about his past. The FBI's trail went completely cold. Then came 1989 and a television show called America's Most Wanted. The show's producers brought in Frank Bender, a forensic sculptor from Philadelphia who had an almost supernatural talent for age-progressing faces. Working from old photographs of List and consulting with a psychologist about how List's personality would shape his aging, the rigid posture, the glasses, the thinning hair, Bender created a clay bust of what John List might look like 18 years later. When that bust aired on America's Most Wanted on May 21st, 1989, a woman in Richmond, Virginia was watching. Her name was Wanda Flannery, and she recognized the face immediately. That was her neighbor. That was Bob Clark. 11 days later, FBI agents walked into the accounting office where Robert Clark worked in Midlothian, Virginia. They arrested him on the spot. He denied it at first, said they had the wrong man. But his fingerprints told the truth. John List was finally in custody. At trial, his defense attorney tried the only angle available: insanity. A psychiatrist testified that List suffered from obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, and that his rigid religious beliefs had created a mental state in which he genuinely believed he was saving his family. The prosecution tore that apart. They pointed to the letters, the planning, the month of preparation, the way he cut his face from the photos, the calls to the schools, the lies to the neighbors. This wasn't a man who snapped. This was a man who planned a massacre with the same precision he'd used to balance a ledger. The jury agreed. John List was convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder in April 1990 and sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms. He would never be eligible for parole. In prison interviews, List showed almost no emotion when discussing the murders. He expressed regret, but not for killing his family. He expressed regret for not trusting God to find another way. He still believed, decades later, that his family was in heaven because of what he did. He died in prison in 2008 at the age of 82. He never apologized. What makes the John List case so deeply unsettling isn't just the crime itself. It's the disguise, not the fake name or the new city. The disguise of normalcy. The suit, the briefcase, the church, the firm handshake. The fact that a man could execute 5 members of his own family and then rebuild the same exact life somewhere else, piece by piece, as if swapping out the people was the only adjustment needed. John List didn't run to the shadows. He hid in plain sight, in the pews, in the office, at the dinner table of a second wife who had no idea she was sleeping next to a man who had slaughtered his first family. And the scariest part? If a forensic sculptor hadn't gotten his jawline just right on a clay bust in 1989, John List might have died as Robert Clark, a quiet man, a churchgoer, a good neighbor, and no one would have ever known. If cases like this keep you up at night, subscribe to Crime Revealed, because the darkest stories are the ones no one sees coming.